What's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Duress, and today we are taking a look at the new cards from base set Scarlet and Violet for the expanded format. Now, you may be asking yourself, why do an expanded set review? Given that PTCG Live basically doesn't have expanded to play, what's the point? Well, my personal favorite way to play Pokemon, or literally any card game that I do play right now, is expanded Pokemon. And I think that expanded doesn't get enough love. I want to get more people playing. But I also believe that more people playing means that, more deck innovation will come from all of those people playing. I also want to do this set review because I think it'll help tear away the intimidation factor of working with such a large card pool. There is now over 10 years of cards, I believe, to work with, starting from black and white up to now base set Scarlet and Violet. So hopefully this can help for some people. And on top of this, I usually do something like this for Magic the Gathering and Pokemon sets and a notepad, so I figured I might as well just make it into a video and put it on YouTube. These are some of my resources and inspirations for this video. Team OmniPoke is kind of where I got the formatting for this set review from, as well as my personal favorite competitive Pokemon channel, kind of where I go when I want to get updated on the standard format. PokemonCard.io for all of the card pictures, PokeBeach for all of the attacks and some of the pictures as well. And then Justin Basil kind of filled in the different holes that it was missing. I would definitely recommend Justin Basil as a great competitive Pokemon resource. So let's dive into a couple of elephants in the room. I do believe we're at the point where we absolutely need best of 3 and sideboarding to become standard in the expanded format for Pokemon, and also standard, but that's outside of my pay grade. I believe that expanded as a format becomes way too unpredictable in best of 1 without sideboards, leading to just completely detracted gameplay. If you had sideboards, you could do really cool stuff like switching out your draw support Bibarels for a mill protection Bibarel. You could switch out your attacking Gardevoir with Trash Lance for the Garbatox and Gardevoir to lock down the board. You could be playing a control deck, switch out your Crushing Hammers in some sort of Lugia matchup for your Enhanced Hammers. That just sounds like really cool, nuanced deck building decisions that I would really like to have in the Pokemon trading card game. While we also have new cards previewed from Paldea Evolved, which is the second Scarlet and Violet set, I'm not going to be referencing them. It's way too confusing for me. What we're going to do instead is, if a base set Scarlet and Violet then becomes relevant because of a new card, we are going to address it in the context of the next set review. And then, of course, past April 1st, there will be nowhere to play expanded Pokemon digitally. What we'll do for Paldea Evolved is really just dependent upon what PTCG Live is able to do with expanded in terms of getting it updated into its true form, or just even being able to play it. There is apparently now an issue in PTCG Live where you are just not able to create expanded decks, so that's something. We may consider looking at some sort of alternative set review that's suitable for just the cards on PTCG Live, or we may just do it as though everything is fine. I'm not really sure yet, but I am sure hoping and begging and praying on my knees that they get this figured out by April 1st. Also, I gotta say, doing it, having this deadline be April 1st is kind of a sick and cruel joke, but I digress. This is the general formatting of our set review. We have our main card that we're talking about over on the left in that yellow box. We got the card name above it. We got the rating in the top right. And then we've got our kind of board of relevant cards here. We got our synergistic cards. You have cards with maybe a green arrow, which means that this card is strong against this card. Cards with a red arrow means that this card is weak to this card. And then cards with a red X means you should not play this card with this card. So let's go ahead and dive into it. First up, we have Klefki. Klefki is a basic 70 HP, one prize Pokemon that has an ability called Prank Lock. As long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, each player's basic Pokemon in play have no abilities. This card is insane. This, you will note, does not follow the same rating scale. I do believe this eclipses the rating scale because it is able to dramatically slow down not just a deck, but just the entire format. No longer are the days of I drop my Deden, I draw 6 into just complete gas, drop my gas, and then play Crobat. I do believe that this card is a large degree better than Generations Wobbuffet. Generations Wobbuffet is kind of the main control piece that we've seen to slow down the first turn or two. And I say control piece not in the sense that, it specifically goes into control decks, but in a matchup where you're trying to basically slow down your opponent's first turn, this is uncomparable. This is dimensions better. This is an unbelievable card. And I have to say, this feels like a card that was designed with Expanded in mind. And that is something you cannot say about literally any other card, I believe, in late Sword and Shield, with the exception of maybe like Regidrago and Zoroark V-Star. Like some of the V-Stars could kind of potentially fit within that category, but nothing comes close to this. This is just absolutely backbreaking. This is going to provide issues of straight up bricking decks. I hope you're not planning to play Turbo Meloetta when this comes out, because I don't know how this operates against that deck. You have to draw incredibly lucky to operate under a Klefki with all of your Genesects and your Meloettas. It's just incredible. You need outs to this, right? You need a Canceling Cologne. You need ability hate like Alolan Muck, basically. But at that point, it doesn't matter, because you shut down, if you're playing Alolan Muck, you shut down the Klefki, but you also shut down all of your basics abilities. So Alolan Muck kind of, but doesn't really work. It does, it works, but not functionally, right? And then the best option is probably just Escape Rope. The thing with Escape Rope is what's going to happen is very similar to the Lost Box kind of innovation and arms race that we had. What's going to happen is, oh my god, there's so much Klefki. Players are going to start adapting their decks, right? Of course. They're going to start slowing stuff down, but they're also going to start, slowing stuff down in the sense that, not being so greedy in terms of the draw support. But you're also going to see stuff slow down in terms of the decks, the amount of deck slots that will be dedicated to maneuvering these types of situations will increase. Obviously, right now it's probably like 1. Maybe you play like 1 Escape Rope to, switch out of whatever it may be. I can't even think of anything right now, but 1 is not going to do it against Klefkis. And if your opponent's playing 4 Klefkis, this becomes a serious issue, because you play 1 Klefki, it's like, cool. Escape Rope. All right, I'm safe. Then opponents start playing 2 Klefkis. What happens now? They just Escape Rope into another Klefki, and at that point, you got to start playing your Gus, your supporter Gus, and in a decent amount of counts, right? And if you have to rely on that every turn, and I wouldn't say obviously not every deck is going to rely on this type of thing every turn, right? You need to attack with most decks at some point. But in the control strategies, oh god, that seems like it's going to be really, really strong. This also completely shuts down all of the turn-ending abilities. As we've discussed, these turn-ending abilities are not particularly good past the first turn. In fact, I would say they're basically bad. Stuff like your Zacian V, stuff like your Radiant Eternatus, stuff like your Sylveon V. Forget it. Just forget it. If your opponent sticks this in the active, and you're going first, even if you're going second, what do you do? It also shuts down just random stuff like Tapu Koko Prism Star. So I do believe that this 5+ rating is warranted, because this goes in control. This goes in basically any deck you want. Do you need to slow down the game? Do you need an extra turn for anything? Here you go. Here's a Klefki. This card is absolutely cracked in half. You should have to buy 2 of them just to play 1 in a game. That's how good it is. It is just phenomenal, and I look forward to seeing the expanded format just slow down, honestly. It's going to be a breath of fresh air, and I'm really excited. All right, and now that we've come down from that high, I need to go ahead and talk about the Terastal ability. First, we'll address the card. This is Arcanine EX. A stage 1, by the way. Oh yeah, we should go ahead and address the fact that we are starting to move back into stage 1s and stage 2s rather than, V-Stars, V-Maxes, these weird, like, evolution typings. Great idea. Thank you, Pokemon. I really do not like having these sorts of, like, goofy evolution types, because then you can have stuff that works with, like, bodybuilding dumbbells is kind of the thing that always pops in my head for some reason, but it specifically references stage 1, so it has this kind of backwards compatibility that I really appreciate. With that being said, Arcanine EX is a stage 1 EX, so 2 prizes, 280 HP fire Pokemon. Its attacks are Raging Claws, 30 damage for 2 fire energy. This attack does 10 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. Triple Fire, Bright Flame, 250, discard 2 energy from this Pokemon, and then it has an ability, folks. It's Terrestrial ability. This Pokemon doesn't take any damage from attacks while on the bench. So, this isn't particularly relevant to the set review, but we need to go ahead and address this because I feel like it falls under the umbrella of issues that we are currently seeing with Pokemon. I'm trying to be kind and understanding here, Pokemon, but what are we doing here? What are you doing? You design the most recognized trading card game in the world based off of the largest entertainment franchise to have ever existed. It's just not acceptable for a play design to take such an interesting and nuanced mechanic in the video game like terrestrialization and just make it a blanket bench barrier in the trading card game. I know you can do better. There's absolutely no point to terrestrialization in the expanded format, given the fact that we have 4 bench barrier Pokemon. I might be missing some, I don't even know, but we have 4 bench barrier Pokemon. Just absolutely unacceptable. That being said, as far as the card goes, 250 damage I guess is decent, taking out stage 1 EXs. And V-Stars with something like a Choice Belt or Muscle Band. Oh, no, sorry, not a Muscle Band, but a Choice Belt. But it does need at least 1 damage modifiers, as we've just said, as well as you kind of just need to chain welders together, which doesn't feel particularly consistent or reliable. And 280 HP is still fine, it's still good. It compares to the V-Stars like Arceus and whatnot. But I don't think it's really like tanky enough to like be able to tank a hit. So you get to use that 1 attack once, and then the Arcanine dies. So this card is just not playable for expanded, unfortunately. We have Armarouge, which is, I guess, our first new Pokemon. Armarouge is a pretty, I think, legit option for fire decks. It's got an ability, Firearm. As often as you like, during your turn, you can move a fire energy attached from one of your bench Pokemon to one of your active Pokemon. And then it's got an attack, Double Fire and Colorless, Flame Cannon, 90 damage. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now burned. And it's a stage 1 prize, 130 HP Pokemon. This is a pretty cool option for fire decks, as I just said. This is basically Sun and Moon Quagsire. It's Quagfire. You could welder to it and then move the energy. Boom, that's sick. I remember like when Quagsire came out, I was aqua patching to it and then sending up all of the energies, and that felt pretty strong. What really is like trying to take a bunch of fire energy though and just moving it all around? I don't know. Not really Volcarona, maybe something like a Mewtwo welder, but deck slots are pretty tight in that kind of deck because you do have a considerable amount of deck slots dedicated to the fact that you have a bunch of Pokemon that you have to discard. So you can also just welder the Mewtwo, which is much easier. But I do think it's an interesting option if we ever get like some sort of like a Blacephalon thing where like you blast off all of your energy. Like that could be really interesting. I don't think it quite really deserves a 1 out of 5 because it is a slightly like strong ability. It just needs the attackers to go with it, and it has to be a very specific kind of attacker, right? Like Reshiram Charizard, I don't know if it would be something like that, but it has to be like a high energy fire attacker. So yeah, got a lot of potential, I believe. Up next, we have Dondozo and Tatsugiri. I'm just going to be talking about Dondozo in terms of the attacks and the relevancy. You basically just include Tatsugiri to enable the Dondozo. It's got an attack for double colorless, Vent Wrath, 50 damage, and 50 50 times the amount of Tatsugiris in your discard pile. So you can max out at 200, and then double water, double colorless. Heavy splash is 120. I like the design. Like, this is a basic, by the way, a basic 160 with a 1, and this attack is 1 energy attachment, right? Because it's just double colorless. That being said, 200 is like still not like that much. It's not bad though. Especially like one attachment, like, and let's go ahead and forget about the fact that, you know, you just play 4 battle compressors. Like, don't worry about, oh no, how am I going to get all my Tatsugiris in the discard pile? Unless you prize them, you're going to find your battle compressors and just slam them into the graveyard. Excuse me, into the discard pile. I've been playing too much Magic. That being said, Girafarig exists. And Girafarig makes this deck just not function. You just lost zone all the Tatsugiris, and you lose. It's over. You would have to also pair this with something else. Like, it is very much like an all-in strategy, as we just said, like with the Girafarig. So you need some sort of like backup option, I think, with this deck. So not terribly into it. It could be fun to mess around with, but up next we have Gardevoir EX. I believe this is one of the cards that people are most hyped for in Standard. I believe it could be relatively impactful as well in Expanded, but in a much smaller share of decks. Gardevoir EX is a 310 Stage 2, again, going back to the Stage 1, 2. Stage 2 Pokemon, Psychic type. By the way, I gotta say, a fantastic move, making these, kind of having this sliding scale of HP. These Stage 2s, as you'll see, the Stage 2 EXs are generally way over 300. Like, 310 is pretty light for the Stage 2 EXs here, as you'll see. So, great design choice. It's got an ability, Psychic Embrace. As often as you like during your turn, you may attach a basic Psychic energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. If you do, put 2 damage counters onto that Pokemon. Also has an attack, Psychic Colorless, Miracle Force 190 damage, heal any special conditions, not relevant. Special conditions, as I think I will address in the future, just not relevant, unfortunately, in Expanded. This ability is absolutely insane. The problem is it's on a Stage 2. Should probably address this now. Given that we are moving into having Stage 2 multi-prize Pokemon again, we really have no idea how viable they are, right? Like, we really don't know yet. Of course, we can reference back to when we had GXs and whatnot, but this is contextually, I think, much different because of that HP bump. Because, you know, this Gardevoir is 310 and can go even higher. There are Pokemon, I believe, in this set that go up to 340, if I'm not mistaken. This is a relevant amount of HP that you are going to be able to tank a hit from. Like, you're going to be able to tank a hit from a considerable amount of decks, maybe even 2, depending on the matchup. So I am not, like, all the way down on Stage 2s just yet. They need to be tested out first. However, it is quite an intimidating prospect to play a Stage 2 in the Expanded, in such a fast format like Expanded. Stuff like a Klefki, the advent of Klefki, will dramatically help the possibility of Stage 2s being viable, but we really don't know until the cards come out. Of course, the obvious home for this is like in Shadow Rider. It doesn't really need it. Like, Shadow Rider can accelerate energy. I think we all really know that very well. It's kind of just a win more card in Shadow Rider Calyrex, but I do find it interesting that you could use it as a late game piece where, let's say you get one of your Calyrexes knocked out with 4 or 5, I don't know why you're attaching so much energy to it, but let's say there's like 4 energy onto it. You can just bring all of that energy back. You do have to put 8 damage counters somewhere, so you have to be cognizant of that, and I think you have to be basically knocking out for the game when you are using this ability over and over again and stacking those damage counters. So yeah, I think it could be a pretty interesting card in that regard. That being said, like, you are dedicating at least 3 deck slots You need the basic 1-2 or a basic Candy 2. Not terribly into that, like a 1-1-1 line of a stage 2 or a 1-0-1 line of a stage 2 is just not consistent enough. Like, you just literally prize one of those and you don't have access to the Gardevoir. So outside of Shadow Rider Calyrex, where does this go in? I'm not really sure. I tried to think of a place, and boy, let me tell you, I could not come up with anything. Thought maybe like Whimsicott could be cool because you just slam all of the energy onto Whimsicott. Actually, I might try that in standard, but I digress. You slam all the energy onto the Whimsicott, and then you can just hit for like 300 with the Fluffball Star. You could also do something like an Espeon Deoxys too, where that cross division is really good at spreading damage counters, but you're trying to actually get it where it's like that modded GX thing where you have all of the extra energy on it. You meet the extra condition. I believe it's, yeah, you get to put 20 damage counters wherever you like. That's very, very strong. Is it game winning? No, but it could be enough to swing a game into your favor. That being said, like, I don't think either of those two options that I've just presented are really strong enough to stand on its own in the expanded metagame. So I'm not sure. This is kind of like Armarouge, where it's an incredibly strong card that doesn't really have a home quite yet. But like the potential is extremely strong with this card, much more so than Armarouge, I believe. We have Banette EX, which is a stage 1 psychic type 250 HP Pokemon. Has two attacks. First is Psychic, Eternal Darkness, 30 damage. Your opponent can't play item cards from their hand during their next turn. And then Poltergeist, look at your opponent's hand. This attack does 60 damage for each trainer card in your opponent's hand. So this is a combination of like two really good cards. This is basically the Poltergeist attack from Gengar and Mimikyu GX, except it gives you 10 extra damage, as well as the Vigavolt Seismitoad kind of attack where you item lock, except this is only 1 energy for the item lock. But then on top of that, you also have to remember that you just have Dimension Valley, which is insane, and will let you use that second attack for just colorless, or that first attack for no energy, no energy at all. That being said, 250 HP is relatively not great. Like, that's pretty weak for a stage 1. Like, we saw that the Arcanine EX was 280, and then the stage 2, so not quite a good comparison, was 310. So you can really starting to see that like scale. That's really the only thing I can find about this card. And I mean, I guess like the damage output is not consistent. That being said, like the lack of like damage, consistent high damage, and the slightly weak HP are like the two main downsides I can really find with this card. Everything else is like very strong. Like, Choice Belt really helps in terms of your Eternal Darkness actually dealing a relevant amount of damage. You could also just bodybuilding dumbbells to make it a 290 HP Pokemon, which is pretty strong. So I'm pretty interested in trying this out. It also can use counter energy like really well. Important to remember that counter energy now works with both these and these EXs, so the stonks are going up on that. It also, because it evolves from Shuppet, just like a normal one prize Shuppet, you can include different Banettes. We had the Banette from, what was it, Lost Origin, I believe? Yeah. That lets you basically VS Seeker, get a supporter back into your hand. So it is important to remember that there are some amount of relevant Banettes that you could use in tandem with this, which I think is really interesting. Next up, we have Toxicroak EX. Toxicroak EX is a stage 1 EX, so 2 prizes again, 250 darkness type Pokemon. For 1 dark, Nasty Plot, search your deck for up to any 2 cards and put them into your hand, then shuffle. For dark and double colorless, Toxic Rip, your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned, put 6 damage counters on that Pokemon instead of 1 during checkup. Here we are, folks. Another set with another half-decent poison card that makes the poison deck in Expanded no closer to viability. It might seem very obvious to some of you, to any of you that have played like Expanded for a long time, like I have, special conditions outside of very, very consistent paralysis, like a Raichu Shock Locks, something like that, really just is not strong enough for the Expanded metagame, as you have to substitute some amount of damage for the conditions that you are applying in card design, which just kind of kneecaps the entire archetype from the start. So never really will ever get there, unfortunately. Oinkologne, I messed up the title, but it's Oinkologne EX. What a name, my goodness. Evolving from Lechonk, which is, again, an incredible name. 260 HP, stage 1 normal type Pokemon. It's got 2 attacks. For colorless, Fragrance Fury is 10 damage. This attack does 30 more damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And then for triple colorless, Heavy Stamp 210, flip a coin, if heads, can't attack next turn. Terrible second attack. First attack, though, is not terrible, though. This card is generally just very underpowered in both like the flat damage and the HP. Like 260, again, not great. It's not Arcanine, like 280. But the first attack is kind of really good against Skyfield decks. Having that one very narrow matchup on a stage 1 means this card never really gets there in terms of ever being playable. Next we have Defiant Band, which is our, I guess, damage modification tool of, or our first damage modification tool, I should say, of Scarlet and Violet. It says, if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, the attacks of this Pokemon this card is attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness and resistance. This card is bad. This has the most consistent damage output across the widest amount of decks. The only problem is you have to be losing for it to actually do anything. Otherwise, you're just taking up the tool slot on your Pokemon. I genuinely believe there's absolutely no reason to play this over something like a Muscle Band or probably even Choice Belt. This is just a dead card when you're doing well. This is comeback mechanics gone wrong. Magnezone EX is a stage 2, 330 HP lightning type Pokemon. Energy Crush for 50 damage for 1 lightning. Sorry, not 50 damage. 50 for each energy attached to all of your Pokemon. And then for 2 lightning, Pulse Launcher, 220, and then 32 itself. This seems so close to being like an actually good card. It hits for weakness against Lugia, though. Hits for weakness against Palkia. That's very relevant. But it also is really good against Shadow Rider. You can actually like one hit a Shadow Rider, 6 energy or a damage modifier or 7 energies attached to all of their Pokemon. The problem is it's not really good against like anything else. What else is it good against? I'm not sure. And I do think the second attack is like really close to useless in terms of the context of Expanded. Like 220 is generally like too light. It takes 2 turns for this to get going, but probably 3, because if you want to do it in 2 turns, you need to bench it right and attach a lightning, or potentially accelerate with one of the things we will talk about in the future. And then Rare Candy the next turn, and then attach as well. So I feel like this just takes too many pieces to get going for not a high enough of a payoff realistically. But I will say it's a cool card and it looks cool. Next up we have Rock Chestplate, our second tool of the set. And the only card that is translated into English, which is kind of dating when I started putting together this set review. But Rock Chestplate is a tool that says the fighting a Pokemon this card is attached to takes 30 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. Now, this card is, I think, potentially very interesting. I could see this card actually just not being a 1 and being closer to like a 2, like a 3 even, like potentially one day. It is an incredibly strong card. It is basically like a I was gonna say Rough Seas, but it's not Rough Seas. It's much better. Like the damage prevention is so much better than like a Rough Seas effect, like healing, because you can potentially get knocked out with that healing, right? But with the damage reduction, you reduce that potential of just getting straight up knocked out and being able to tank more hits. The problem with this is that fighting in the expanded metagame is absolutely absent. It straight up just doesn't exist. The things that I can think of are something like a Primal Groudon EX, and we're not talking about the new EX, baby. We're talking about the old EX. We're talking about X and Y EX, which was very, very strong. Was that X and Y? Yeah. Very, very strong card. Or maybe even something like a Colossal VMAX. I think that would be kind of the new age, like, home, like, version of Primal Groudon. I know it's not even close to the power of Primal Groudon was back in the day, but these are like the two most viable potential homes, I think. That being said, like, if we get something in the future, and there are cards on the horizon that could potentially enable this card could be insane. This card could be so frustrating against and make it so that it's absolutely impossible to get one hit. But for now, it's got the same problem as Armarouge and Gardevoir, where it just doesn't have the home. Next up, we have Koraidon EX, one of the two main legendary Pokemon of the set. It has an ability Dino Cry. I should talk about its basics first. It's a basic Pokemon, 230 HP, very strong for a basic, wow. Fighting type. So that's a serious buff to the fighting type, especially when you consider the ability Dino Cry says once during your turn, you may attach up to 2 basic fighting energy from your discard pile to your basic fighting Pokemon in any way you like. If you do use this ability, your turn ends. Double fighting and colorless, wild impact to 20 damage during your next turn. This Pokemon cannot attack. We talked about Klefki and how it completely hoses these like turn ending effects. But we can't just be like, oh, Klefki, this is terrible. Because you're not going to see Klefki every game. These turn-ending effects are getting more and more pushed with every set. And I think that's a really good thing for the expanded format, specifically as it kind of makes some sort of interesting decision-making have to occur between going second and wanting to attack and going first and wanting to use these kinds of turn-ending abilities. Again, you can't use these things past the first turn unless you're doing something really tanky. The damage output on this card with the attack is real mediocre with a real downside. And I do kind of like the idea of like charging up, again, the Primal Groudon EX, but I know personally that idea is somewhere between bad and terrible, so I recommend any of you do that. There are just no good basic fighting acceleration targets that I can think of currently. We have one card that we are about to talk about after this one, Great Tusk EX there in the middle. My mind goes to stuff like, again, like Colossal. You could evolve into the Colossal, but once you evolve into the Colossal, you can't use this ability, or into the VMAX, sorry. You could use Urshifu, but then again, you have to evolve into the VMAX. You could use Buzzwole, but keeps up with the modern expanded metagame. So where do you play this card? I don't know. It's kind of having the same issue of just being very powerful, but not really having a decent like home for it yet. So yeah, but again, just like Gardevoir, just like Armarouge, very, very high potential, and I could see this card going up in terms of a rating. Up next, we have Great Tusk EX, which is a basic fighting, 250 HP, 1 fighting, Bedrock Breaker, 40 damage, discard a Stadium play. That's like, okay, fine, not great. You're probably in a pretty bad spot if you have to use that. Its main attack that you want to be using, though, is Giganto Tusk. Interesting translation. This Pokemon does 50 damage to itself. I am not terribly high on this card. It's kind of an okay max elixir target, but that kind of also comes with the condition that it's just getting knocked out next turn. So it's like, how good is it really? I don't really want to like chain 3 of these together. Chaining 3 of these together does not sound like a winning proposition. You need 1 damage modifiers for V-Stars. Can't imagine, even with some of the tools, like we have Gutsy Pickaxe, we have for the acceleration, we have Grant for more damage modification. We have Cape of Toughness to be able to tank more hits. Even with all of this going for it, I think this card is just not playable and expanded, unfortunately. Up next, we have Hawlucha. Hawlucha is a basic Pokemon, 70 HP, fighting type, has an ability called Flying Entry. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto the bench during your turn, you may choose 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon and put 1 damage counter on each of them. Also has an attack, fighting, double colorless, wing attack, 70 damage. I don't know. I think this is very good in terms of fixing. If you want to use this type of effect to fix the math, quote unquote, I think this is much better than Galarian Zigzagoon, because you just get an extra one for free. You have to put it somewhere else, but that also, again, goes towards fixing your math. And if you're doing a whole scoop up net type of situation, like, yeah, I could see that being pretty strong. That being said, it's like Galarian Zigzagoon's main home for the expanded format is Teenachomp. Being able to put a damage counter on the main thing, on the active Pokemon, and then attack for 240, but probably 270 because you have a band on Teenachomp. Plus the counter on the active is 280, and then you can go from there. And that is a 2 attachment attack because of double dragon energy. So that is an incredibly strong attack. Not being able to target the active really sucks. So I don't think this is that home. I don't think you ever really want to play this in Teenachomp. If you do, it will just be like the 5th and 6th copies of Galarian Zigzagoons, but I don't think that card needs a 5th and 6th copy of Zigzagoons. This will be more of a card that you rely on to just, again, fix the math, to make sure you get the knockout, which is not to be underrated, which is why it's at a 2 out of 5. Like, that is an incredibly important aspect. Next, we have one that I thought was kind of interesting. Again, this is probably one of the worst cards that I've included in the set review, but I thought this Lucario was interesting. It is a stage 1, 130 HP fighting type Pokemon. For fighting, Vengeful Knuckles, 30 damage. If any of your fighting Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon during their last turn, this attack does 120 more. And then fighting double colorless, 120, can't use that specific attack next turn. So there's this weird thing where there's 5 Lucarios with kind of good abilities, which I've put up here. I'm not going to go through them because they're not good enough to really talk about in individually on their own. When you take all of them together and kind of have this weird Lucario toolbox almost, I'm pretty into that. I want to mess around with it here. Could also do something like play Garchomp, not Teenachomp, but just straight up Garchomp, though it is a stage 2. I don't know about that. To kind of help enable your Lucarios, because one of the Lucarios lets you search for a card if you have a Garchomp in play. That being said, I don't think this is anywhere close to being good, or it might not even be playable. I don't know. But I think it's kind of funny and interesting. Specifically, individually on its own, this card is kind of interesting in a fighting deck. Again, as we just talked about, fighting is absolutely terrible, so it just doesn't have a home, unfortunately. This revenge attack, again, it's important to highlight the fact that it does not work with Pokemon that are not fighting. Very important aspect. And then besides that, there's really not too much to talk about. I mean, you have Gutsy Pickaxe, which can, again, let you accelerate. Not particularly relevant. Up next, we have Team Star Grunt, which is our energy removing, however you want to describe it, supporter of Scarlet and Violet. It's a supporter that says put an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon on top of their deck. So I had quite a wild ride in evaluating this, as you'll see by the fact that there is a Magic the Gathering card on there. At first, I was like, you know what, this is okay. This is fine. In terms of the supporters that you see here in front of you on your screen, I put it in between Team Flare Grunt and Team Yell Grunt. However, thinking about this more, I think this is one of the better, if not potentially in some matchups, the absolute best energy removal option that we have, which is why I gave it a 3 out of 5. Denying your opponent a draw and giving them the same energy they attached the last turn can be absolutely game winning on tempo. And if they have no draw support, or if they can't attack next turn, this is backbreaking. This is very, very, very good. Those are very special conditions that you're trying to meet. But again, if you can meet that, you are basically skipping their next turn, given that they don't have to evolve or do anything like that. Given all of this, given this insane tempo swing, I think in a vacuum it is actually the second best. And again, as I said, potentially the best in certain matchups, certain situations. I find that this card is particularly interesting that there's There's not too many, if at all, cards I can think of in Pokemon that puts your opponent's resources on top of their deck. That being said, it's important to remember that this is bad against decks that can accelerate straight from the deck, of which there are a decent amount of. And consider something like a Shadow Rider. Like, Shadow Rider does not care about this. If you Star Grunt a Shadow Rider's energy, they just Underworld Door over and over again and just keep drawing. So that's not really particularly relevant. There's also a lot of cards where it searches. There are just a lot of search cards in Pokemon, so this is something to keep in mind. It's a very difficult card to evaluate overall, though, especially we need to understand how it will fit in contextually into the expanded metagame, much more so than like the attackers and whatnot, because these kinds of control pieces are very, very, very metagame dependent. But this is a good card. Let's not get anything confused here. This is just a straight up good card. This is, and if you've ever played Magic the Gathering's Vintage Cube, you will definitely be well aware of Plow Under, which is basically kind of the same thing as Team Star Grunt, which is kind of funny. Plow Under puts 2 target lands, which are basically energies, on top of your library, which is your deck. You'll be surprised if you cast a Plow Under how many times your opponent will, in response, just concede. This effect is a lot like that. And y'all are about to learn how backbreaking of an effect that is. Of course, there's so much more draw support, there's so much more search support, but if you can Star Grunt somebody in the right position, the game is really close to over. Next we have another really strong card. This is Electricity Generator. It's an item that says look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 2 basic lightning energy cards, and attach them to your lightning benched Pokemon in any way you like, then shuffle the remaining cards back into your deck. So it's interesting, it's not bottom, right? It's shuffle back in, which has some amount of relevance given that we have a decent amount of one-ofs being played and expanded. You are able to find your one-ofs that you hit off of that Electricity Generator. In terms of your non-energy stuff that you see there, you will be able to hit those cards with a much higher frequency, given the fact that they're getting shuffled in rather than going straight to the bottom. So already a plus there. And then, of course, the effect is just insane. The immediate home, where I consider this is Pikarom, just being able to Coco Prism Star and then Electricity Generator onto this is just absolutely obscene. There's also the Miraidon, which we're going to be talking about in a bit. There is the Pawmot, which is this little guy here in the middle, which we'll be talking about in a bit as well, though I think that's more of a fun inclusion rather than a real inclusion, but we'll see. 2 off the top 5 also is not terribly difficult to hit in terms of, these kind of like mid to high. I want to say like 12 to 14-ish in terms of like energy counts, 12 to 14 in the deck. You could play something like an Oranguru in order to, take it from your hand, put it on top, and then Electricity Generator. So you guaranteed hit 1, but probably hit 2. I don't even know if that's really necessary, though. I don't even know if you want to do that. Though I will say, 1 Oranguru is such a small deck commitment that I think it's okay. This card is, even though it's unguaranteed acceleration, the fact that it's on an item is just, forget it. It's so, so good. It may be the tool that pushes the electric type or the Pikarom deck back into being competitively viable. I honestly think it is that good. Perfect. Next up we have Pawmot. Pawmot is a stage 2 130 HP. Oh my god, that is so weak. Lightning type Pokemon. It has an ability, Charge Up. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a basic lightning energy and attach it to this Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. As an attack, Lightning Colorless, Electropaw, 230 damage, discard all energy from this Pokemon. I don't know exactly where this goes, probably as maybe like a 1-prize attacker in that kind of Pikarom deck. Again, works great with Electricity Generator. 1-shots a Palkia, 1-shots a Lugia. Only problem is discarding all of your energy really, really sucks, and 130 HP means it's getting 1-shot every time. It has free retreat, but again, I don't know how much that really matters when it has such low HP, so I don't think it's ever going to be really competitively viable, but It's kind of cool. I don't know. It's a lot of damage. 230 is a lot of damage on a Pokemon that's not a multi-prizer. I'm pretty into that. Up next we have our second main legendary Pokemon of the set. This is Miraidon EX, basic 220 lightning type Pokemon with an ability Tandem Unit. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for up to 2 basic lightning Pokemon and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. And it has an attack, lightning colorless, Photon Blaster, 220, can attack next turn. So now we're starting to see that there is a real swath of lightning cards that I cannot imagine that this doesn't make it a couple degrees better, if not just being straight up competitively viable at this point for expanded. That is insane as an ability. It is 3 nest balls for the price of 1, and you can just keep using this ability past the first turn of the game because it doesn't end the turn. Just obscene. That's obscene consistency. Do you want to get your whatever the basic for the Pawmot is to set up a Pawmot? Sick. Do you just want to get Pika-ROMs? Sick. This is just an insane ability with an attack that is not good. You don't want to use this attack, of course, but if you need to, you're gonna use it, right? And honestly, now that I'm looking at it, it says 10 less than the Pawmot with absolutely 0 setup and same energy cost. It just outclasses Pawmot, I guess. So yeah, I mean, this lightning has to be a real consideration for expanded at this point because there's so many tools coming in this set. It's incredible. If only fighting got some of those tools, because fighting got a lot, but it definitely does not seem as though it got enough. Up next we have Revavroom. This is a stage 1 metal type, 140 HP. Excuse me. Ability is Rumbling Engine. You must discard an energy card in order to use this ability. Once during your turn, you may draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. And then metal and triple colorless, knock away 90 damage, flip a coin. If it's heads, this attack does 90 more. That's it. This is really good. Love that it's 140 HP. It's not big, but it's not a free knockout. It's not 90 HP, so it can't be level balled, unfortunately. But that is a serious amount of HP on what is basically a support Pokemon. And it's got a real attack. Not a real good one, but it's not Hug or Tail Smash. You are at least guaranteed to get 90 damage, which is much more than you can say with Tail Smash or Hug. What kind of deck do you want to play this in, though, is the problem. I can't really think of anything. Of course, it's not really compatible with too many special energy reliant decks because those decks tend to be very low count in energy. Take something like Skyfield Sylveon that is playing literally 4 energy cards. So you can never use this Rumbling Engine consistently in that deck, as well as advance your game plan by attacking. You don't want to play in something like Volcarona because Volcarona has Zebstrika, which discards the entire hand because you want as many of those fire energies in the discard pile, which this doesn't really enable. It just puts in 1 and makes you draw 6, which is fine, but Zebstrika is just so much better in Volcarona. So it's a very good card where I just can't even imagine the homes it really fits in, unfortunately, right now. I guess you could do something like a Shadow Rider Calyrex, but does Shadow Rider need the draw support? I don't think so. So, and then of course it is a stage 1, so you have to remember it is taking up at least 2 deck slots. So it is a card I think will find a home eventually, which is why I've given it a 2 out of 5. I think this rating could potentially be scaled up to a 3 out of 5. It just needs to find the home. Again, there's a lot of cards without homes. Given that we are moving into a base set of a new generation, it kind of makes sense. And in the future, we'll see some of these cards, rise in prominence and come back in future set reviews, basically as cards in the blue box rather than the yellow box. Mesagoza is our first stadium here. Once during each player's turn, that player may flip a coin. If it's heads, that player searches their deck for a Pokemon, reveals it, puts it into their hand, then shuffles. I would like a guaranteed effect on my stadium, please, and thank you, we have much better search cards that are guaranteed with either a downside that's like easily negated in expanded, like discarding, like Ultra Ball discard 2 for a Deden draw 6. The search is just far and beyond way better than this. Can never ever be considered in expanded, unfortunately. If you want something like even the passive ones like Chaotic Swell and Wondrous Labyrinth, like those are passive, but they're so brutal that they're so much more effective in affecting the game state than something like Mesagoza will like enhance your game state, if that makes sense. Like this could potentially do nothing the entire game if you flip tails the entire time. You could flip heads the entire time as well. But even at that, I don't think this effect on a coin flip is acceptable in expanded. I mean, for goodness sake, we have Dimension Valley, we have Skyfield. These are just such obscene stadiums that see like fringe play in expanded. I mean, Skyfield not so much fringe, but Dimension Valley at this point is like relatively fringe, and like those are dimensions beyond Mesagoza. Even something like Brooklet Hill, which came out in Sun and Moon, like that also searches for a Pokemon. Again, it's to 2 specific types, but that is miles better than Mesagoza. So unfortunately, this is a hard skip for me. Beach Court, I think, is slightly more interesting. It is a stadium that says the retreat cost of each basic Pokemon in play is colorless less. This is kind of interesting with something like a Miraidon, I believe, has 1 or maybe 2 retreat, and bring down from 2 to 1 is like fine. That's decent. That's like pretty good, right? The main attraction of this is that it brings it from 1 to 0 as well. So all of your support Pokemon now have free retreat. Your Tapu Lele, Dedens, and Crobats all have 1 retreat cost that gets reduced to 0. Your Comfies also get reduced to 0 too. So Lost Box becomes interesting with this card. Do you want to play this card with Lost Box? I'm not sure. I haven't really played Standard in a while, so it would be hard for me to evaluate. And I've never tried out like a Lost Box expanded deck, so it would be something you'd have to play around with. But I think it is definitely better than Mesagoza, and it is a relatively interesting card. I think it could also be something in like Volcarona, I believe, is a 1 retreat cost, so you could give your Volcaronas free retreat, though there's so many good fire stadiums that I can't imagine Beach Court would beat any of those out. One thing that we need to talk about, one thing that I've come to realize, is that given the fact that we get about 1 to 2 stadiums a set, and the stadium design and in terms of power level is significantly toned down, it is entirely possible that we never get a stadium in Scarlet and Violet that is like much better than this. Like there will be something that probably goes to like a 3 out of 5, right? But we're not going to get any sort of Skyfield, Dimension Valley, Wondrous Labyrinth type of just these cards that are fundamentally like warp the game state around them. What that means for expanded development, I'm not sure. Though I hope this is kind of addressed in the future, because these stadiums that we've been getting recently, like Path to the Peak, we got about, a year or so ago or something like that, maybe a little longer. But since then, there really have not been too many, like if any stadiums that have impacted expanded. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but I don't think I am. So yeah, that's going to be something to keep in mind, unfortunately. So yeah, that'll just about do it for our Scarlet and Violet set review. Let me know what you think. I know this is definitely a interesting and relatively unpredictable set, given the fact that we are moving into a new generation, but I definitely love your opinion on the new cards. Like, let me know what you think I'm underrating. Let me know what you think I'm overrating. Do you think I'm overrating Klefki? I'd be interested to know, because I think that card is absolutely insane. I think it's going to change expanded at its core, etc., etc. Are there any cards you think I skipped over from the set list that are worth talking about? I could maybe address in a future video. I'd definitely be interested to see. What do you think of the items? What do you think of the... Do you think I'm correct about the stadiums? Like, the stadiums, what's going on? Like, there's no good stadiums. Do you think the lightning type will get there in the expanded format? Because honestly, I'm starting to wonder if it will. Like, I'm starting to think it will. given the amount of like actually really powerful tools that it has received. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this set. Of course, I'm not happy with the fact that there is absolutely nowhere to play Expanded on PTCG Live. There's not even anywhere to make a deck for Expanded, which is a whole nother issue that I should probably address in a PTCG Live specific video at one point or another. Who knows? But there are it just seems like an incredible amount of actually impactful cards. Like, this set seems like a relatively good step up from the past couple of sets that we've had. Like, of course, we had, like, you know, I don't know, the past couple of sets have seemed very much focused around like one Pokemon, and then everything outside of that has been not very good. Whether it's the Silver Tempest with like everything focusing around Lugia, but then Lugia was not very good at Expanded, and everything else in Silver Tempest outside of Regidrago was just like forgettable. And then Lost Origin with Giratina, but Giratina really hasn't kept up with the kind of the big boys. I'd say it's competitively viable, but it hasn't really kept up. And then everything else from Lost Origin, I couldn't like tell you much about. Like, I can't remember. Whereas like Scarlet and Violet, it feels like there is a broad amount of cards that are going to be impactful in a beneficial way. Whether you think, I think Klefki is going to be overall very beneficial. I think the lightning stuff is going to be overall very beneficial. I think the fighting stuff could be potentially very interesting. There's, of course, not the tools for it right now, but maybe 6 months and a year down the line, we're wondering, oh god, how do we beat this tanky fighting deck with rock chestplate and whatnot? Yep. Let me know. I'm rambling here. But I gotta go edit this video and get it uploaded. So stay safe, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch y'all on the next episode. Peace out.